We cut through the noise to give you the real story. Welcome back to Verdict USA.
All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a story that is just wild. We're talking corporate greed, weaponized local police, and a massive controversy that has completely shaken the Lego community. I mean, how does the wholesome world of plastic building bricks escalate into a full-blown crime drama?
Well, we're going to track the absolute lunacy of this story across 4 parts: the corporate takeover, small claims and cheap tricks, weaponizing the police, and finally the absurd aftermath.
At the center of all this chaos is a guy named Brian Mancel. Back in late 2023, Brian consigned his pristine, sealed 15-year-old collection of roughly 780 Lego Star Wars sets to a Bricks and Minifigs store in Oregon, and his goal was deeply personal. He urgently needed to pay for his 83-year-old father's medical bills, and he wanted to fund his kid's college education.
And we're not talking about pocket change here. $200,000. That staggering number represents the high-end estimated value of his entire collection. This was the foundation for a consignment deal that actually worked perfectly for a whole year. The store sold the sets, took a cut, and gave the rest to Brian. Straightforward, right? Well, until things went incredibly wrong.
Part 1, the corporate takeover. It is frankly fascinating how fast corporate seized control. In November 2024, the original store owners told corporate they wanted to sell the shop to take an overseas job. That very same day, corporate kicked them out and terminated the franchise. And here's the kicker. The previous owners were actually caught on security cameras, explicitly warning the corporate rep that Brian owned those Star Wars sets. The rep basically said not to worry, they were taking over. So, 8 days later, Brian reasonably asks for his unsold inventory back. But instead of just handing Brian his property, corporate refused. They essentially argued that, hey, our corporate policy doesn't do consignment, so that original contract you signed, void. The attitude was basically, that contract you signed with the old owner, yeah, that's toilet paper to us. Kick rocks. They just decided to keep his massive collection. Which brings us to this crucial legal concept, nemo dat quod non habet. It translates to no one can give what they do not have. It's pretty simple, really. A franchise termination clause cannot magically transfer ownership of property the franchisee never actually owned in the first place. Because Bricks and Minifigs corporate never paid for or owned these sets, marketing and selling them is, by textbook definition, selling stolen property. You just can't use a franchise termination to justify keeping inventory you never bought.
Part 2, small claims and cheap tricks. So Brian is now facing a massive $70,000 corporate lawsuit that he absolutely couldn't afford to fight. He turns to a YouTuber named Reckless Ben for help, and Ben decides to hit them right where it legally hurts. But there's a catch. The state of Oregon caps small claims court at exactly $10,000. So Ben had to get highly creative. Ben's strategy was brilliantly unconventional. He brought in 10 separate plaintiffs, each with independent claims, to sue Bricks and Minifigs for the max amount of $10,000 each. That brought the total lawsuit to $100,000. And the crazy part? They won by default. Why? Because corporate completely refused to even show up to court. So now, the company legally owes $100,000. But instead of returning the bricks, which had a wholesale value of around $70,000 to $80,000, or, paying the legally owed debt, corporate literally shut down the entire store location overnight just to avoid paying. They chose total escalation over a simple, quiet resolution.
Part 3, Weaponizing the Police. This is where the source material details the story shifting into a true crime, Better Call Saul-style escalation out in Utah, involving franchise owners Josh Johnson and Brandon Best. According to the source, when Ben tried to serve papers for a personal lawsuit, the owners seemingly used the local Utah police as their own private security force. We're talking an illegal traffic stop where cops falsely claimed Ben ran a stop sign. Dashcam proved he stopped, by the way. Then, owner Brandon Best goes completely catatonic on his porch, calls the police, and the officers immediately threaten Ben with trespassing while just repeating corporate talking points. But it gets so much darker. The source outlines a terrifying sequence that starts with an anonymous call claiming Ben had a heroin in his car. The police pull Ben over, search his vehicle for 2 long hours, and find absolutely nothing, because Ben doesn't do drugs. The police then allegedly try to bully him into a false confession, literally telling him, "We play differently over here." Then comes the fraudulent warrant and raid. The explainer details that owner Josh Johnson was allegedly recorded threatening Ben, saying he'd tell the police Ben stole the Legos if the lawsuits continued. That resulted in a judge signing off on what the source claims was a completely bogus warrant. The police executed a SWAT-style raid on Ben's house, roughing him up and dislocating his shoulder while he was standing completely still.
Following the raid, Ben and his team were arrested for disorderly conduct and defamation. Their crime? Setting up a charity GoFundMe for the victim's family. During all this, police snatched an assistant's phone, bizarrely claiming that simply hitting the lock screen button was destroying evidence. The victim's family claims this alleged broad daylight corruption stems from the owners and local law enforcement being heavily tight-knit within the local Mormon community.
Part 4. The absurd aftermath.
After a judge finally reviewed those highly disputed police charges and released Ben on bail, the relief was incredibly short-lived. Almost immediately, another non-bailable warrant was mysteriously issued for an unspecified crime. Feeling the local authorities were compromised, Ben was forced to literally flee the country to Mexico just to avoid being thrown into a cell without bail.
It is absolutely mind-boggling to step back and contrast the wholesome nature of plastic Star Wars toys with the reality of an international manhunt. I mean, we've gone from a father trying to pay for his dad's medical bills to a YouTuber on the run in Mexico. It's surreal.
But before we wrap up, it's absolutely vital to remember a key point from our source. Do not go out and harass your local Bricks and Minifigs employees or individual franchise owners. Seriously, these mom-and-pop storefronts have nothing to do with this. Corporate is simply using frontline employees as a human shield to absorb the public backlash.
As the source explicitly states, the pressure belongs squarely on corporate leadership. They could end this nightmare today by simply doing what they should have done back in 2024, just return the family's property or pay the $100,000 legal debt they owe.
So what's next? Will corporate finally face accountability, or will a YouTuber remain in exile over plastic bricks? As you process all of this, ask yourself, how was such a wholesome hobby allowed to spiral into such profound injustice? Thanks for joining me for this explainer.